Bronze Licence course, a presenter's guide by John Bladen. The goal of this guide is to formalise the way in which Bronze Licence courses are presented. The outline of the course, hoping that the facility can accommodate it, would be that there'd be a welcome or introduction, followed by questions concerning the online component. We would then go through and explain the energy systems, and then typically write some training sets and talk about the energy systems that are being used during the workouts. The goal of this is to get some practical understanding of the energy systems. Then to go through some season planning. This is vital so that these students leave the course with the capacity to be able to work and develop their own season plan to help pass the course. Typically the students are broken into groups at some stage to interact with each other and to work on sessions. In the afternoon, ideally, we conduct 2 pool sessions, one based on skills or strokes, and the second one based on training sets, types of training sets, techniques, the use of race analysis to explain why stroke counts, times, splits, turn times are important to develop a specific training set to achieve a swimmer's goals. At the end there should be plenty of time to take questions, summarise the course. It's important that the presenters are aware of the type of participants that are taking part in the course. There will be a significant range of knowledge from ex-competitive swimmers that may have competed at extremely high levels to students with sports backgrounds, and a number of students may not have a very little background, maybe based in Learn to Swim. Around about 70% will probably not finish this course. They're doing the course to gain some extra knowledge to help them, but they don't have the capacity, either the facilities, the squads or a work position to enable them enough experience to get through this course. Around about 10 to 15% will go on to try to do their silver licence. So you can assume that most of your students will probably be mini and junior squad coaches that are there to gain a bit of knowledge. Will probably have very little understanding in training sets and energy systems. The goal of the face-to-face element with the presenter is so that the students can fill in any gaps of their knowledge. The students should leave with being able to understand how to write a season program and sessions based on the use of energy systems, overload, adaptation, recovery. They should have a clear understanding of race analysis and how to produce a competitive model so that they can design training sessions and a season plan to achieve those competitive goals. The goal of the swim sets are to advance the students' knowledge of stroke technique and also to provide some practical demonstrations on how to actually train swimmers. The presenters should provide plenty of opportunity for the students to ask questions so they can fill in any gaps in their knowledge from either the online learning or just practical experience. It's important that presenters realise that they need to remain contactable after the course to help the students complete the course. A number of students will struggle with understanding the levels and the standards that are required, especially if they're not coaching swimmers already or do not have their own head coach to liaise with. Energy systems. Most students that haven't had any previous education find this subject the most difficult. It's the presenter's opportunity to break it down into simplistic terms so that all students have a basic understanding of energy systems. Whilst presenters will have various methods of presenting this information, here is one option. Normally start off with explaining that aerobic and anaerobic energy systems do not work alone, but effectively work alongside each other, but having different levels of representation at different effort levels and at different periods of effort. Initially explaining the phosphagen systems, ATP, anaerobic systems, lactate, and aerobic systems in A1, A2, AT1, AT2 and max VO2. To set those up in very simplistic terms for the candidates is useful in helping them gain knowledge. The use of a whiteboard explaining that the ATP system is a small bucket of energy that explodes and is useful for the start. Then explaining what its usage is for, how it could be used. What by training that energy system do you hope to improve? And some other areas around its use within training sets. And then moving on to explain the lactate system. Again, an explosive energy system in the absence of oxygen, anaerobic. It's a dominant factor in exercise from 0 to 60 seconds. Also typically explain what its use is for, how much rest and recovery is required, and also explain the differences between lactate production, lactate tolerance and lactate removal sets. Moving on to the aerobic system, talk through the basics, the use of oxygen and the other fuels that are required such as glucose, but then carbohydrates, fats and proteins. Going on to explain that the aerobic system is a lifelong energy system. You're using it as you're sitting here, and then but at what level do we use the aerobic system? Initially at rest or sleep, discussing the heart rates, then at A1 level, and going through and explaining the positives and negatives of exercising at A1, A2, AT1, AT2 energy systems, and again going through and explaining the differences and positives, then going on and explaining max VO2, the positives, the negatives of those energy systems. Then trying to discuss them as a whole, how they interact within a race, what levels the different energy systems are utilised. Following on from the energy systems, I normally discuss energy, fat, protein, carbohydrates. Not dwelling on this area for a long time, but normally giving students an opportunity to ask questions about nutrition. Moving on from nutrition, we go back to the energy systems. Normally go through each of the energy systems, handing out this sheet which covers the energy system, the main event it would be used for, the intensity and fibre type, the distance or duration where it would be the prominent energy system, how much recovery is required between sets and between sessions, and what you would use it for, and going through some example sets. Often ask the candidates here to actually write some sample sets for each of the energy systems. At this point we then move forward and have a look at how much of each energy system should be used within a training program or a training set. Typically trying to explain that younger swimmers require development of an aerobic base, and that sprinting becomes more dominant as the swimmers get older, and that sessions should reflect a greater percentage between the lower range aerobic work into higher range aerobic work, sprint and above race-based training. When moving on from energy systems into season planning and sessions, I think it's important to let the candidates know that there are lots of different ways to do this, but to present this as a good, basic, typical way of planning an season plan. Typically, the candidates are asked to produce a season plan, either summer or winter, not necessarily an annual plan. So typically a plan that would last 13 to 20 weeks. Typically go through the factors that are involved in the season plan, such as when the major competition is, holiday, blocks of work. Also, I tend to ask the candidates here about their situations and the things that they need to consider in their plan, whether they're an indoor or outdoor pool, when their pools are open, all the different factors that can contribute to individualising a plan for them. Tend to go back and get them to consider the percentages of energy systems that they're going to use in each of their phases. It's important to go through the training principles of specificity, overload, progression, recovery, reversibility, and how to individualise training sessions and training programs. I normally go through a simple overload example set where we might start in a mini squad with a simple set of 200, 400 time trials into a junior squad where we might have a set of 50s that would develop into a set of hundreds, that would then progress into more advanced sets, building up into holding specific training paces and training times as the swimmers evolve through the program into junior age group swimmers and age group swimmers. Whilst putting a training setup on the board, it's important to explain that this is just an example, but go through the practical implications of overload, volume, and then intensity, and the use of rest and recovery. It's important that we go through the concepts of frequency, volume and intensity, and how these factors contribute to the overall load and then the monotony of the load that the swimmer is subjected to. Look at the three types of training paces: faster than race pace and below race pace, for programming and for the types of sets that you write within the session. Normally then we'll continue and discuss about race pacing and competitive modelling. This is normally a reasonably basic approach, but we look at the energy systems that contribute to each of the races and therefore the type of sets that you might design and the percentages that your training program may use. We look at some principles into practice and ask the candidates to look at how they would sequence training sessions, where best to fit their gym work, kick, pull sets, technique, where the overload and where the recovery is in their program. We look at the testing program, looking at the type of tests they can use, normally reasonably simple, to evaluate their program through the season. Look at the general evaluation of the whole season at the end, look at their instance of illness, injury and fatigue. You then move on to session design. We're looking typically at what I call a BITSA session. Most of the swimmers that these guys will coach will not be swimming more than 5 times a week, and therefore a basic session that they repeat through, changing it slightly for the different phases, is often a simple form of programming that they can utilise to have success. Once the simple session, BITSA session as I've called it, is explained and understood, also it's worth advancing that into, for swimmers that are training multiple times a week, 6+, how that the week should be scheduled with sessions of effort and recovery.